And here we are. Okay, so welcome to the session. This is part of our Speakers Mentorship Program. We are essentially trying to support our speakers, especially new speakers. So this presentation has been designed for people who are new to giving tech presentations. It's going to be a bit of a meta presentation, presentation about how to give a presentation. And we're going to have time for your questions as well. My name is Marco. I'm a chair organizer of PyData London. I've been chairing our local conference for a few years, and now with PyData Global, I'm the speaker support chair, so I'm involved in all the activities regarding the support for our speakers. On the left, you have a picture of me in my better days, and on the right, there's a picture of Pamela, who is also been working with me with the Speakers Mentorship Program. She's from the Python Chile user group. So she's covering essentially other time zones with this presentation, and we've been working together to prepare the material. On the call, I also have Chetan from PyData Delhi, who is helping me today with the questions, moderating the chat. You want to say hi, Chetan, or are we good?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm from PyData Delhi, as Marco said. I'm from India basically, and I'll be representing here India section. So I see a lot of speakers from India here. So if you have any questions, as Marco said, you can post it in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye over there, or you can unmute yourself and ask when Marco gives you the time to. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So the two main pillars of the presentation here are essentially how to design our presentation and how to deliver our presentation. These are the two main parts. You see 3 bullet points on the outline here, because before we get into that, I also want to mention that it's useful to start kind of sketching your presentation. So things that you would like to do before you start even designing your material. So these are the topics that we're going to touch on today. Starting from the beginning, sketching our presentation. Actually, before we start, it's good to sort of pause for a moment and think about where you are, okay? So if you're here, it's because you have sent a proposal for our conference. The proposals, all the proposals have been through a review process. We had more than 100 reviewers looking after, I think, 350 or so proposals. I don't remember the exact numbers. Many proposals, and many good proposals anyway. And if you're here, it means that some reviewers and then our PyData committee has considered your work valuable for our audience. Okay, so there is a group of highly skilled professionals in the data science space that think your work is interesting, valuable, worth presenting at the conference. This is something you should consider, because often, especially first-time speakers, feel like maybe they don't really belong here, but if you're here, it's really because you deserve it. So think about that for a moment before you even start. PyData Global is going to be one of the most prestigious data science conferences in the world. We have representatives from PyData London, PyData Berlin, Amsterdam, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Delhi, and so many more that I'm going to forget now, but we have roughly 150 groups, PyData groups around the world, and we have a very solid representation. So we're happy to have you here, and yeah, take a moment to kind of congratulate yourself for being here and think about where you are. And after you, you realize where you are, it's good to think about where you want to go. So what's your goal with this presentation? What's the purpose of your presentation? What do you want to say at our conference? So typically your proposal already has a bit of an outline of what you're going to talk about, okay? And you might have already some kind of bullet points that you want to touch on. You might have either takeaway messages or anyway, a rough idea of what is going on with your presentation. Still, you know, think about the presentation itself now. So are you going to talk about maybe some open source library that you've been working on, or that you have been authoring, or are you going to present some kind of academic research, some results that you want to deliver, that you want to propose at the conference, just some knowledge that you want to share that you acquired recently? So thinking about your direction here is always useful before you even get into preparing the presentation. And the key question, I would say, is who are you talking to, right? Who is your audience? Who are you preparing and delivering this presentation for? So focusing on the audience it's going to be very, very helpful for you to clarify, to kind of fix all your ideas in your mind and to understand what you want to talk about. So who's the audience? What is their background? Why should they care about your content? How is your presentation going to be relevant or useful or important or interesting for them? Okay. I've delivered many presentations at PyData events, PyCons. I've been teaching for 20 years. And when I started thinking about my audience a bit more, that's when the shift happened for me. And that's when my presentation started really becoming a little bit better. So thinking about your audience is crucial for your success at the end of the day. You need to care about your audience. And if you don't have an idea just yet about your audience, often, especially for people who give a talk for the first time, your audience could be yourself 2 years ago or yourself 5 years ago. So what would you like to tell to your younger self? What did you learn that you wished you learned a few years ago? That's often one way to think about it, but there is no hard rule. Still, keep your audience always in mind. And at this point, you start sketching your presentation a bit more. We're talking about high-level structure here, so it could be really bullet points or boxes and arrows where you literally on paper start sketching your presentation. It doesn't have to be on paper. You can start working on your slides if you prefer. You can open up your favorite presentation software, PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever you prefer. But I suggest you to start really from the outline, from the kind of looking at things from a distance. Now, if you have no idea about the overall outline of your presentation, a starting point is typically something that looks like this. So more or less every tech presentation is going to have a central problem. So you start with an introduction to the problem, a problem statement, or an introduction to the broader topic if you prefer. From there, you would like to discuss the algorithmic approaches, the tools, the libraries, all in all, the solution that you adopt to tackle the problem. And finally, you get to your results or the lessons that you have learned along the way. Rough outline is not always so linear. There is no hard requirement, but typically in a tech presentation, we have this kind of structure. So you can start from there, clarify what your problem is, clarify how you solve it, and clarify what you learn along the way. It's a good starting point. And then you're going to iterate probably a little bit on the outline per se. If you don't know anything else, it's a good way to start. Now that you have your outline a bit more clear in your mind, you can start thinking about designing your presentation, designing the support material for your presentation. I'm talking about support material, meaning slides and Jupyter notebooks, code, whatever makes sense for you. A common mistake that people often do, especially when they're new to speaking, is this kind of misconception about your slides being your presentation. Well, your presentation is not really about your slides. Your presentation is the message, the story that you want to tell, the message that you want to deliver. Your slides are simply there as a support. Slides should support the message, but the slides should not be your message, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. So once you have this in mind, you start designing your slides and you will end up with something that looks like this. So you design your slides because you think slides are going to be useful to support your presentation, but probably you're going to overdo it and you will write a lot of slides and you have a lot to say, many words because you know, there's a lot that you want to say and not enough space on the slides, so you're going to cram all the content into slides, and you're going to use a tiny font because you want to put a lot of stuff on the slide, and you don't really realize it that it's too tiny because you know, it's in front of you and you can read it anyway. And then when you deliver your presentation, you will end up reading your slides word by word, but the people can read faster than you, so they will get tired. So with this one, I've done essentially I committed two capital sins that people often do. One was kind of reading my slides. If I sit through your presentation, I don't want to listen to you reading your slides. I want to listen to your message. I can read the slides by myself. So tell me your message, tell me your story. That's the main suggestion. And the other problem is a design problem, just too much in a single slide. So a common mistake is overloading your slides, and the suggestion is don't overload your slides. Don't put too much content on your slide, okay? Again, the slides are there as a support. You want people to focus on your voice, on your message. You don't want people to kind of spend all their mental energy reading your slides, okay? So just a simple sentence or a simple phrase or maybe images, they can be useful to capture people's attention while you are delivering your story. So looking at our previous slide that is very, very dense, too much content, how can we improve it? Basically what I just told you about not putting too much on the slide, and the whole story that is written on this very dense slide could be really simplified, summarized even very much. I'm telling you that slides are useful, but you shouldn't put too much, you shouldn't overdo it. So typically you can get rid of a lot of text, and now this slide has the same amount of information, roughly, as the previous one, without all the noise. So first step, summarize your content. It's okay if you start doing a bit of a brain dump on your slide and you write a lot, but then the suggestion is to start summarizing. Summarize your text, you condense this kind of long message into something more digestible. And it also helps you to think about your message, to think about what you want to say, really. Remember, your slides are not lecture notes, they're just a visual aid that you use to support your message. From there, we can take it a step further. We can, for example, here get rid of the bullet points. Bullet points in general can be useful in context if you're showcasing a bullet list, but here they're not particularly meaningful. I'm getting rid of the bullet points. In general, I would say any graphical component that doesn't really serve a purpose could be distracting. So you want to remove everything that could just distract people. Okay, so the next step after you summarize is simplify the design. Okay, so simplification will be the main keyword here. Any graphical gimmick should go if it doesn't serve a particular purpose. If you do PowerPoints, you know, the transitions between slides, they were fun back in the 90s. Now they're just annoying. Don't do anything distracting. That's the message. It's okay to have a nice template. You don't have to go black font on a white background like I'm doing here. It's okay to make them pretty. They just don't have to be distracting. And if your company has some branding policies or guidelines, maybe there's only so much you can do. It's great that your company is supporting you. Again, keep in mind that you want to showcase your message without distractions. Then you kind of iterate, you go through a few iterations here, you condense your content again, you simplify your presentation. So carry on and simplify more and more until you literally distill your message into something very, very simple. And now I've ended up with a small slide with a tiny piece of text and a lot of blank space. So we can now maybe think about presenting the message in a nicer, more appealing, more readable way. So the same message could go into something that looks like this. So bigger font, which means more readable, also a nicer alignment kind of in the middle, so it looks a bit better. Graphical components can be useful here, icons or emojis, whatever makes sense in context. Here I'm saying slides are okay, they're useful, they're nice, they're good, but don't overdo it. So make them easy to read. That's the kind of the short message. And this slide here it's sort of giving us the same message as the previous cluttered slide. Okay, it's just much more easy to digest, easy to read, and in this way the audience will sort of get the message immediately, and then they will listen to your voice, they will listen to your story. Okay, so try to compare the simplified slide with the original very verbose bullet points. They deliver the same message without all the clutter. But now, what if you really have a lot to say and you have a lot that you want to share with the audience? Why not putting everything on the slide? Well, my suggestion for you is to share some kind of speaker notes or maybe Jupyter notebook, whatever makes sense. So if you have extra content that you really want to share, if you have a lot to say, but it doesn't really fit in the slides, so to speak, put them in the speaker's notes, share the notes. If people want to get into the details of what you're saying, they will look for the notes, they will reach out. You can put a link to the speaker's notes at the beginning of your presentation, or you can put it in your in the abstract of your talk, so it will be also available on the conference website on the schedule. You can share it on social media, on the chat that we're going to have during the conference. So there are several ways to share your material. You don't have to put everything on your slides, just the key components will do. Also for sharing code, the code that you might share on your slide doesn't have to be, you know, something that you could run on your slides. You're not going to run your slides. You're going to run maybe something on a proper Python script or on a Jupyter notebook. So that's what you want to share. And on your slides, you just put the key components, the key ingredients of your story. Okay, so that's the main suggestion. That's what I'm doing here. I'm not putting everything I'm telling you here on the slides. I'm going to share my notes, and I'm going to share also your questions and the relevant answers in a few days. Okay, now talking about design, I want you to sort of pause for a moment and think about the usage of images, if they're useful, images, symbols, icons, diagrams, plots, whatever you call them. They can be useful to sort of deliver complex messages. Probably you heard that a picture is worth 1,000 words. All in all, that's true. We can describe complex concepts using a picture. So you capture the attention of the audience. They don't have to read a lot of stuff, but you're showcasing something complex at the same time. You can even convey emotions and whatnot based on what you're talking about and on the picture. Not everything can be represented as a picture, especially if you want to share a piece of code, for example, but that's an option that you should always keep in mind. Now, the previous image, for example, was something to say, well, stop for a moment and think about imaging. And I've been using a stop signal that is kind of a universal symbol, if you want. Well, there is a word stop in it, so you're going to stop. And also the shape and the color of the signal is something that you see across many, many countries. So you feel like maybe it's a universal symbol. Well, I started digging a little bit more into it, and I realized that, well, while there is some kind of a understanding of the stop signal across around the world, it's not really universal per se, and it happens more often than we think. Often universal symbols are less universal than we think. Okay. At PyData Global, we're going to have a global audience, okay? So different cultures, different people, different languages, and the context does matter here. So something that is obvious for us is not necessarily going to be obvious for everybody in the audience. So even though images will be helpful, you can still think about, well, is this really going to convey the message that I want to share with people? So in summary, global audience, that's a good thing. We're going to have different, let me say, cultures, as in different experiences, paths of life, a lot of different people coming together in the same forum, and this is really great. So we should really strive for using inclusive language and inclusive imagery, okay? Something that, again, is obvious for us, maybe it's not going to be obvious for everybody, and different cultural norms. Maybe something that is totally fine in some culture could be upsetting in other culture. Try to think about that as well whenever possible. You should try to be as inclusive as possible in your presentation, both for the use of language and the images that you choose. One more suggestion when crafting your slides is the usage of different visual aids. Visual aids as in something that you can use to guide the audience to focus on particular details of a slide. So let's say you have a bigger diagram and you want the people to focus on one component, or like I'm doing here, there's a bit of a phrase and I want you to focus on one particular word. Let's say I want you to focus on the word visual in this particular case. Well, I could literally point to the word visual using an arrow, okay? Or you could highlight the word visual itself in many different ways, or you could blur everything out apart from the word visual. This is what happens, when we do presentations in person. People sort of point at the big screen, they jump around. Typically, they end up not talking into the microphone, so it's a bit of a shamble. So I would say the usage of visual aids that we have to use in virtual presentation, because we're not there pointing at the moment at the monitor, is something that is going to be helpful also for in-person presentations. Okay, and again, try to make it not distracting. Okay, something that you would just want to use for the audience to basically benefit from your presentation. For in-person presentations, sometimes you also see laser pointers being used to kind of point to particular elements in the slides, and maybe you think people will take you more seriously if you have a laser pointer, but they can be really distracting. So people just waving the pointer around, it's not going to be useful. You're going to give me a headache if you just wave your pointer. So I would say using visual aids to walk people through what you want to say can really help the audience to kind of stay with you, stay engaged. I've been talking about visual aids and using images. One last consideration here, and I'm not really an expert on accessibility, but something that at this point we should really consider. Not everybody in the world is going to be able to see the number in the middle of the slide here. In particular, there's a percentage of the population suffering from color blindness, and they're not going to be able to get the number that you might see in this particular presentation. I'm not an expert on accessibility myself, but what I want to say is just it's worth thinking about it a little bit. At the very least, putting together green and red on the same slide close to each other, we kind of know that is not necessarily a good idea. You may want to look into maybe color palettes that are a bit more friendly for color blindness. Everything that I've been telling you so far, big fonts and whatnot, serves the purpose of being easy to use, easy to digest for a broader audience, let's say. So even though I don't have, the deep knowledge in accessibility, still I would like people to have at least some appreciation that this is something we should think about, okay, in our design. So wrapping up on the design part, and then we're going to pause for a moment if there is any questions, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat in the meanwhile. So we've been discussing about making your slides simple, easy to digest, put only what is needed on your slides. Readability counts if you stick to the PEP20s and Python, okay, readability counts. So use a large font size. As a rule of thumb, if you are looking at your slides on your laptop, let's say, you put it full screen. If you stand a couple of meters away, if you can't read your slides, then the font is too small. When we are going to be back to in-person meetings, think about the person sitting at the end of the room, okay? So if you can't read your slides from a couple of meters away from your laptop, then the person sitting at the back is not going to be able to read the slides on the big screen. That's typically what happens. Don't put everything on the slides, share notes, share code, share everything that would otherwise clutter your slides. your audience will appreciate that. Use pictures whenever possible. They help conveying the message, but also try to be inclusive. If you do so, make sure that you use inclusive imagery, inclusive language, and try to use visual aids whenever possible, once again, with the purpose of helping the audience. So that was the first part of the presentation about design. I'm going to pause for a moment before getting into the second segment. Do we have any question in the chat, Chetan?
Yep, we have one from
Yep.
Sonam. So Sonam is asking that she wants to know if sharing a code on the notebook, and if there are 2 or 3 notebooks, should I close the PPT and then switch between the notebook, or what is preferable according to you?
There is no hard rule here. So about sharing your material and switching between presentation and notebook, there's no hard rule. Just think about how you can make the transition smooth, let's say. Don't overstress it. I would say you can simply be on your slides, and then you switch screen, go back to regular view. From a kind of full screen view, you go back to regular view, and then you switch into the browser where you have the notebook. Not a huge deal. If you are comfortable with editing, video editing, I mean, you can think about editing out the segment where you are doing the switch, so it will look a bit smoother, but you don't have to do it, okay? Don't sweat it. You can basically share your screen and do what you would do in an in-person presentation. That's typically good enough for the talk, even for a virtual delivery. If you do have editing skills and you're happy to use them, you're happy to do the extra work, by all means, that would be great, but don't feel like you have to. And just make sure that you have the link to the notebooks. If it's like a GitHub repo or whatever you find more useful, make sure that the link is also included in your slides and all the references are there. Other questions?
Sure, thanks, Marco.
All right.
Thanks, Marco, for answering this. We have one more from Laisha. So she's asking if, I'm sorry if I used the wrong pronoun, but Laisha is asking what are the key points to add in a slide when you're introducing yourself as a speaker?
The key points to introduce yourself?
Yep. In the slides, yep.
So if the question is you want to craft a slide to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what are the key points that one should add?
There is no hard rule. In whatever you want people to know about you is fine. In my intro slides, I didn't tell you what I do for a living. I just told you that I'm from PyData London, and for the purpose of the presentation, this is good enough. If you have your employer supporting you, typically people have to say, I work as a software developer for such and such. Or on the other side, if your employer is not supporting you and they don't want you to share that you work for them, you might want to keep it private. There's no hard rule. I've seen also presentations where the speaker was just skipping the intro slide, just getting into the content right away. There are different ways of thinking about it. Short answer, whatever you want to share with people about you is going to be fine. If you are a developer, if you're a data scientist or a researcher, whatever the job title is, where you're from, you name it. There's no hard rule. More
Thank
questions?
you for the answer. Yep, we have one more. So this question is in 2 parts, and Christopher is asking, is it okay for us to do some practice talks at the local PyData meetups? This is the first part, and the second part goes like, or maybe we can post the video online to get some feedback.
So practice is going to come up in the second segment where I talk about delivery of the presentation. And if you have local meetups that are happy to have you presenting, that's a good idea because you're going to have an audience. So by all means, if you have the chance, do it. you don't have to do it, but if you can do it, it's always good. Rehearsing in front of an audience can be a good idea as well. If you have colleagues or friends that can help you, kind of sparing half an hour or 1 hour for you, it's also a good idea. When you do this kind of rehearsing in front of an audience of friends and family, let's say, people feel like they really have to give you feedback, and they tend to be kind of overly polite and whatnot. So maybe the feedback that you get is not necessarily actionable per se. Maybe they just feel like they have to make a comment. Don't expect feedback. Do the rehearsing just for you to go through your presentation, to understand the timing, to understand how you feel about presenting and so on, rather than seeking feedback from a generic audience. Then if you're lucky, you will have somebody pointing out maybe tiny issues with the presentation, with the design of the slides, with the content, random typo, whatever. Otherwise, rehearsing should be more for you to kind of understand yourself rather than seeking for feedback, at least from my experience. It's also good to, if you have friends telling you, yeah, you're doing a good job, it also feels good. So that's fine as well.
This is all the questions that we have.
Okay,
I
perfect.
have one more add?
Yeah, please.
Should I add? Yep.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the thing that you were saying when we were using like graphics or something, that we have to be more inclusive. So
Yeah.
I was looking up that the thumbs up sign that you used is also offensive in some countries like Iran and Greece. So I'm thinking like how far one should go while checking out these things, that if this is inclusive or not.
It's an excellent question, and I guess the short answer is that at some point we are going to screw up, I guess, in a way or another, whether we mean it or not. So there must be, at the very least, a learning process, and we don't have to make we're not the ones who should make a big deal out of it, right? You can just apologize and move on. And then it's for the other people to choose whether the apology is good enough and it's genuine or not. I don't have a very, very strong answer here. And I think we shouldn't overthink it. We live anyway in a world that is getting more and more global, so we are exposed a bit more than, let's say, 20 years ago to global audience. And we should try to learn from it. That's all I'm suggesting. The suggestion about inclusivity, when possible, try to avoid jokes on topics that we know are going to be something that make people upset, and they could be divisive and so on. Otherwise, just go with your common sense so far. I don't have an answer for everything that could potentially upset people. Just try to avoid it consciously if you can. That's the simple suggestion.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Yeah,
of course. So let me go into the second half of the presentation, and then we're going to have again more time for questions at the end. And this is going to be about the delivery. And the starting point and the most crucial point for me is you have to prepare. You have to take the time to prepare. I know that the message often here is practice, 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 but I'm using prepare as a word because when I was a student, I was attending one of these how to prepare a presentation presentations. And the lady said something like, if you fail to prepare, you should prepare to fail. So the word prepare stuck in my mind. And it sounds a bit dramatic, but in my experience, there is some truth here, okay? So the success of your delivery will heavily depend on how well you prepare. There's no hard rule here. You just need to kind of put the time and take the time to prepare. You should work on your slides, of course, but you should also rehearse your presentation a few times. until you feel like everything runs smoothly. Now with the online delivery that we are recording, basically if something goes wrong, you can record again, but then it means that you're going to spend more time. So you might as well just go into it with the mindset that you have to put the time. And remember that it always takes more time than you think. Okay, that's true still after doing many presentations. The time that I spent here was much more than I expected, and that's how it is. As a rule of thumb, there is no hard rule, but as a rule of thumb, anything between 10 and 20 hours per hour of delivery. So for this segment, I took roughly 2 working days for preparing the material, plus the rehearsing. It could be more, it could be less. You might have already a better idea than me when you're working on your presentation. You might have some material from other presentations, from colleagues that you can reuse, diagrams and whatnot. Still, you have to prepare. The worst thing that could happen during your presentation is that you switch to the next slide and you get surprised by your own slides because you don't know what to expect, right? So if you prepare, you kind of know everything smoothly, you know the flow of your presentation, and then everything will be fine. So preparation is key. And preparation and rehearsing in particular is fundamental because when people give a presentation in public for the first time, they tend to speak much faster or much slower than they usually do. And for you to know how fast or how slow you are in the live presentation, you need to try, you need to rehearse. So rehearsing will help you basically finding your pace, finding your voice. So this is about finding your pace, but also finding how you say things out loud, how you can sort of merge together concepts, how everything flows, okay, how you find your confidence, and how you want to craft your message. Finding your voice is really about you. You don't have, I didn't say this one explicitly, but just to be clear, you don't have to implement everything I'm telling you here. These are just my suggestions, but your presentation should be reflecting how you give the interpretation. So that's what I mean by find your voice. We already have one Marco in the PyData Global committee. We don't need any more. We need your ideas, your voice to come through, okay? And rehearsing is a way to find those ideas, find that particular voice, find how the voice sounds, and finding also how happy you are with your voice and how it sounds. And as a positive side effect is that you also know about the timing. When you craft your slides, maybe you've heard people saying 1 slide per minute. Well, it's just any approximation here, just as good as any. We don't really know how long it's going to take until we go through the slides, okay? So rehearsing will tell you how long the presentation will take, and when delivering a presentation at a conference, the timing is not a suggestion, the timing is something you have to stick to it. So for regular talks, we have half an hour, 30 minutes presentation. And for short talks, we have 5 to 10 minutes or anything in between. So below 10 minutes for short talks and half an hour for regular talks. It's okay if you do it a bit shorter. It's never okay if you do it longer. And this is going to be particularly true when we go back to in-person meetings where there is the next person who wants to go on stage. You cannot overrun and you cannot take any of their time, okay? So stick to the timing. It shows, first of all, respect for the audience and for the next speakers. And it's all about preparing and kind of being ready to deliver your message. Next, I want to mention the aspect of using humor in your presentation, humor or jokes in general. This can be okay. Presentations can be even fun, can be entertaining, should be engaging. Presentations should be engaging. Now, the risk here, especially when you're new to it, is that you are going to overdo it again, and you kind of try very hard to look like a professional comedian or stand-up comedian anyway. And in that case, the audience will notice that you're trying too hard to be funny. you're delivering a tech presentation after all. So the suggestion is, some humor, if it's natural, if it flows naturally into your presentation, is going to be fine. Don't push it too hard just for the sake of trying to look funny. Whatever you do, make sure that you're not going to alienate your audience, okay? So jokes, as we mentioned earlier, using inclusive language. Also jokes should not be exclusionary. You should never tell a joke that is going to put off a group of people. And in particular, we're going to have a global audience. So some kind of humors that are fine in some particular country or in some particular group of people are not going to be fine in other groups of people. So if you find yourself in a place where a Catholic priest, a rabbi, and a data scientist walk into a bar, don't go there. Nothing good is going to happen there, okay? So jokes are fine, but remember the code of conduct, never try to alienate your audience. If you alienate your audience, they will stop listening to your message, even if you're giving a good presentation. Otherwise, you just tell a bad joke, that's enough to put people off and they will not listen to you. Another type of jokes that doesn't typically go very well is whenever you try to put yourself down in a sense. Often people, especially first-time speakers, they have this kind of a humor as a defense mechanism, saying, yeah, I didn't really have time to prepare, this is not going to be very good, something like that. If you tell me the presentation is not going to be good, why should I sit through your presentation, right? You're going to put a lot of people off in this way. Just open saying, I'm happy to be here, and this is what I want to tell you. And the audience will just sit through your presentation and listen to you. Okay, so once again, humor is fine, but try to craft it carefully if it flows well with your presentation, and never try to alienate your audience. Now, before we get into the delivery through recording, which is what we're going to do in the PyData Global conference, I just want to mention a couple of tips that are maybe a bit more specific for the recording here. Remember, the deliverable for the conference is a recording of your presentation. The deadline is not written on stone. It's kind of a mid-October. You're going to get a communication from the technical committee or from the program committee in a matter of days with a more clear deadline and whatnot. But we are aiming for mid-October anyway for the delivery. After the presentation, you're going to attend a couple of live Q&A sessions during the conference. So this is going to be in November. During the conference, so people are able to ask you questions during your talk or at the end of your talk. And I think you're going to be asked to attend 2 different sessions to cater for different time zones, essentially. Okay. Now, before we get into the recording part, first of all, think about your environment, talking about your room. This is not my room, it's just a picture that I found. If your room is going to be messy, it could be distracting, okay? So your room should be neat enough for people not to be distracted, let's say. So in my case, you see there's nothing here, not in particular here. You don't have to sell, you're not selling your room, your house even. So it doesn't have to be something that looks good on a brochure. It just have to be something neat enough and neutral enough so that people don't notice, essentially. So tidy up a little bit. Ideally, your environment should also be quiet. So if you have things like a washing machine running downstairs, probably there's going to be some background noise coming through your mic. So think about that as well. And think about also the fact that you're going to share your personal space with the audience. So if you have your kids running behind you in your presentation, there is no problem with that, but think about whether this is something you want to share with people, okay? So here I put the camera at an angle that I'm okay with. There is no particular issue with what I'm sharing in my background. I'm not sharing kind of the rest of my living room and bedroom and whatnot. I'm just sharing this little corner, which is inoffensive enough, okay? So think about your environment. As part of the environment, think about the lighting situation. This is Dean from the technical committee. So on the left, you have a bad example of lighting because you have light coming from the back. And when the light is coming from the back, it's going to be difficult to see your figure and everything will look kind of darker apart from the window. So here I've been closing the curtains and I've been switching off the lights, the artificial lights in front of me. And what you should obtain is something that looks like the picture on the right, where the figure, the face, the upper body is clearly visible. You don't have to be a kind of a professional here. Something as simple as closing the curtains and switching on the lights typically is going to be enough, okay? Also think about the camera and the angle of your camera. If you're using a laptop in particular, if you put the laptop as you would do normally when you are doing your work, probably the angle is not going to be flattering. You're going to see kind of up my nose if I put the laptop here. So what I'm doing for this presentation is I'm putting the laptop on a little stand. If you don't have a stand for a laptop, you can use books just to raise the level of the laptop a little bit and make sure that the angle of the camera is something you're happy with, okay? So there's no kind of a high-tech solution here. It's just a matter of positioning your camera as you want the people to see you, basically. And once you're ready, once the room is, you're happy with the layout of the room, once the hardware and software setup is ready to go, this suggestion is always try to do a bit of a screen test. So do a short recording of you talking through your slides. Something less than 5 minutes is good enough, a couple of minutes. So you will become a bit more familiar with whatever software you're using, and you will see how things move around. So here, as I go full screen, things change and move around. If I do it for the first time, maybe I'm surprised, but I've done it already before the session, so I know exactly what is what and what goes where. So those kind of things, just to make sure everything runs smoothly and making sure that you're happy with the quality of the recording, with what you see and with what you listen as well. I know people don't like to listen to themselves, but just for the sake of managing the quality of your presentation, that's something you should really think of. And it's also a good idea for rehearsing your presentation. So if you record yourself and then you take the painful effort to watch you through your presentation, you can see if the presentation runs smoothly or if you can rephrase something and whatnot. Okay, so it's always good to test, do a screen test. And I'm wrapping up on the delivery part of the presentation here. So in summary, take the time to prepare. And as you take the time to prepare, as you rehearse, you will find your voice, you will find your pace. Make sure that you understand the timing of your presentation. Maybe you need to go back to designing your presentation, cut something, put something in the speaker notes or in the additional material. And as you're going through, you're giving a tech presentation. Some humor is fine if it comes naturally, if it flows, and if you're not overdoing it. Of course, try to be always as respectful as possible. And as you're delivering, think about the setup of your room. There are more details in the document that you got from the technical committee with a few details about what to do and how to achieve good results. Just tips here. There's no hard rule. Whatever works for you, but we just want you to think about the setup. And finally, test your setup with a screen test. Okay, so that's the idea for the delivery. Now, I'm going to pause again for a moment, just in case there are questions. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and I'm going to close then the segment telling you about the question and answer that comes after your talk. But before we get there, Chetan, any question from our speakers?
Yep, we have one
Yeah.
by Sonam. So Sonam is asking, Sonam is saying that I had a live tech talk last year at PyCon and I had rehearsed a lot and made sure 30 minutes presentation on stage. It somehow shrank to 20 minutes. So how to make sure that it doesn't happen or even use that 10 minutes?
So you're saying you prepare for 30 and as you're giving the presentation, it goes to 20.
Yeah.
right? It happens. So if your presentation shrinks, it's not terrible. If your presentation goes over time, that's bad. And the preparation and giving the talk out loud is typically one way of going about it. Then it could be that people get really nervous when they're on stage and they speak very, very fast, even though they spent a lot of time preparing. It happens all the time. It's not the end of the world, so don't sweat it. And you're going to forget about a lot of things that you wanted to say and you're not going to say them during your presentation. It happens. You want to capture people's attention, you want to basically deliver some of your message, and you want people to be kind of hungry about it. You want them to know more. So they will ask you a question and they will come talk to you if it's an important, an in-person presentation, or they will reach out through the chat or through social media. So this is what happens essentially. Don't sweat it is my suggestion, but if you prepare a lot with experience, so over time, as you get more and more experience, these kind of things will happen less and less. So don't worry too much about it.
So there are no more questions right now on the chat.
Okay, let me just tell you then what happens after your presentation, and then we can either wrap it up, or I'm happy to stay on the call. So after you deliver your presentation, which is going to be pre-recorded, we ask you to attend essentially some session so that the audience can ask you questions. And for new speakers, this is often something a bit frightening, because people expect all sorts of difficult questions. That's usually not the case, okay? So the Q&A session is an opportunity for you to connect with your audience even more. You can clarify some concept, you can sort of go back to some point that you discussed a bit too quickly, and then you can clarify those concepts. The type of questions that you have is either somebody who maybe missed a particular detail, so you have the chance to go over it again, clarify, or maybe somebody who would like to know more about your idea on something. So the usual questions that you have from the PyData audience, they tend to be anyway friendly. People are there for learning. So it's really an opportunity to connect with people and offer some deeper insights. So good questions give you the opportunity basically to connect and to show your knowledge even more. People don't go asking questions just to make sure that you feel inadequate or just to show off and whatnot. It could happen. I'm not saying it never happens. It could happen, but typically it doesn't happen. People come for learning. They sit through your presentation for learning, and then they would like to know more. So try to look at the Q&A session as an opportunity to show your knowledge even better. And if you don't have an answer for a particular question, if a question feels like it's very difficult, or if it goes beyond the topic of your presentation, that's fine. If you don't have an answer, just be honest about it. It's a bad idea if you try to make up some kind of answer on the spot just to look smart, because people will notice it. So just say that you don't know, maybe write the question down so you can look it up later. If it feels like a good question, offer to follow up if you want, so you have an excuse to chat with this person later. You don't have to do it, but if it feels like a good idea, it could be an opportunity for a nice conversation. Or just simply say, I don't know, and we just move on. And on the topic of moving on, not every question is going to be a good question. Sometimes question will sound a bit aggressive or confrontational. Typically, people playing devil's advocate and then trying to look smart or something. And it could be that people are trying to look smarter than you, or it could be simply a genuine question that is going to be phrased in a way that feels a bit aggressive or confrontational. Moderators are going to filter these questions as much as possible. So there are moderators taking care of that. If they come through, if these kind of questions come through, don't sweat it. I know it feels like you're under attack or something, but just try to be professional and offer a short, brief, polite answer, and then we move on. And the audience will be with you, okay? So whenever there is a person in the room trying to be smart and being a bit like a devil's advocate, everybody else will be like, yeah, that's fine. So the audience will be on your side. Just make sure that you try to kind of calmly and politely offering a quick question, and then we move on. The moderators should do the moderation job. If it doesn't happen, yeah, the suggestion is try to be professional. People will appreciate. Similarly, sometimes people go off and they start some kind of monologue. They look like they know it all in the room. Moderators should shut them down. If I'm the moderator, I will shut you down immediately. If you go off on a monologue, I will tell you, ask your question. Because the Q&A is about the speaker. The Q&A is not about the person asking the question, okay? If it happens, same suggestion, short, polite acknowledgement. It's not even an answer that you have to give, and we move on. All in all, remember the audience will sit through your presentation because they want you to give a good presentation. Nobody will spend half an hour watching you hoping that the presentation is going to be bad, okay? So the audience wants you to succeed. This is something that you should remember, and it applies also in the Q&A session. So that's kind of the final message that I want to leave you with. So wrapping up, 2 parts, 2 core messages: focus on the audience and take the time to prepare. This is really key. Everything else is really details that will fall in place as you go along. Focus on the audience and take the time to prepare. That's my summary. That's also the end of my presentation. We are just about at the end of the hour. I'm happy to stay on the call for any kind of question or comment or chat that you might have. But I'm going to close the recording for now. So that's the end of the presentation. Do we have any question from the audience?
So there's one on the chat, Marco.
Yeah,
Isabel
let me just close the recording now. Okay, and we are stopping the recording.